Welcome back, Exiles. It's Naidra. It seems like a lot of you guys liked the last video I posted, which was the Fireball Comet build, and a few of you even asked for an updated version of it. And so today I'm bringing you guys exactly that. For those of you that didn't see the last video, if you haven't switched over to this build yet, I would recommend possibly starting off with the previous video and starting off with that build. And then once you level up a little bit and get into the 80s and possibly into the 90s, switch over to the current build that I am posting today. And so before we dive into it, I just want to say, first of all, thank you guys so much for watching. And secondly, if you guys have not yet subscribed to the channel, please don't forget to do so below. Let's go ahead and dive right in. Just in case you guys didn't get to watch the last video, what we're doing here is we are using the Fireball Comet build, which is triggered by cast on minion death. What we're going to do is we're just going to cast Fireball, and that really should be mainly the only button we're going to be using a majority of the time. However, in the instance where you're going up against elites or you're going up against bosses, you may want to do a little bit more than just the one button click for Fireball, and that's going to be a couple of different things. First, we're going to use Sigil of Power. Secondly, we'll use Conductivity. And then third, we're going to use Eye of the Winter. And so all of those things together will significantly reduce the enemy's resistances. And so, like I mentioned, this is going to be mostly just a one button click type of a deal. However, there will be the off chance where you will need to use a little bit more than that. So with that being said, let's take a look and see how this build is going to work. Pretty simple to use. We're just going to be casting Fireball, like I mentioned, and then once we cast Fireball, then the Raging Spirits will be automatically summoned, and then thus triggering your comets to fall down from the sky. We've made a couple of adjustments to this to try to trigger Comet a little bit more frequently than what we were doing before, but I'll show you guys a couple of different variations that you can use with this specific build. And let's see if we can find one more group before we go back to town and show you guys how this works. Alrighty. And perfect. I'm glad that happened too, because I did want to show you guys that sometimes by using the current setup that we have in certain maps, I am seeing a little bit of a lag. So if that happens, we'll quickly swap over to the mobility support gem as opposed to using the wild shards gem, which is what we're currently using. But in most cases, you shouldn't have that problem. But like I mentioned, if you do, you can just swap over to mobility. If you don't like having wild shards on at all, then you could just use mobility instead the whole time. Mobility is really helpful because it helps you attack while you're also still consistently moving, and this also can help with survivability as well. So let's go back to town so we can see what our equipment looks like, and then we'll take a look at our skills, and we'll also look at our passive skill tree as well. Alrighty, so starting off with our equipment, we kept the wand the same as the one that we had previously, which is just a rare withered wand. It doesn't really matter exactly what wand it is, as long as you have these specific affixes. So the first important thing that we have on here is the 102% increased spell damage. It's really important that we have just general spell damage as opposed to specific element. A, this will allow you to swap builds if you decide to go something else without necessarily needing to get a new wand. And B, this will apply to all of our skills. The second thing we want to have on here is the additional maximum mana. The more mana we have, the better it's going to be, the more you'll be able to attack, and the more damage that you're going to do. So if you can get more than 100, it'll be great. 100 seems to work pretty well for me right now. The other thing that we have on here is +2 to all spell skills. Now for this one, you can go a couple of different ways with it. One, you can do plus to all spell skills, or you can specifically choose to get plus to cold skills. By getting plus to cold skills only, this is going to increase the power of your Comet and your Frost Wall, but it will not impact your Fireball. And it is important that we have the lowest possible level Fireball that you can get. Definitely don't want to get anything that's going to give you plus to fire skills, and we definitely don't want anything that's just going to give you plus to lightning skills. So either plus to all spells, or we're going to get plus to cold skills only. The next important thing to have on here is the increased critical hit chance for spells. We want to try to land critical hits with every single attack that we're getting out there. This is going to increase your overall DPS. So we do have a lot of increased critical hit chance, and we also have quite a bit of critical hit damage. And then the last thing that we have here is gaining mana per enemy killed. This is what's going to keep you on track with your mana, especially as you're going through your mapping. This is going to help with AoE specifically. It's not going to help you against bosses. So if you're wanting to use this build for bossing, then I would probably get something that's got cast speed instead of the mana per enemy killed. However, in most cases, you are going to be facing a lot of monsters, so this one's going to be the most beneficial. And then the other thing to mention that we have here for our secondary weapon is we're using a staff that allows us to have level 18 Sigil of Power. We don't really care for the additional affixes that are going to be under that. The only thing we care about with this is that we're getting that Sigil of Power, and Sigil of Power is going to help our overall DPS, and this also will greatly help us when we're going up against bosses as well. Taking a look at our gloves, we have a couple of things that are really important to have on here as well. The first thing is going to be the increased energy shield. Now, my 28% increased energy shield is pretty low, so if you can get something that's got higher number, it is going to be really helpful. However, you must have some kind of energy shield on your gloves. The other things to look at on here is going to be your maximum life and your max mana. We want to try to have at least 150 mana on here if you can. So I'm just a couple points short of that, but again, it's crucial that we have as much mana as possible. And then the last thing we want to look for on here is going to be resistances. So if you can get triple resistances on here, would be the best way to go. For me, I was only able to get dual resistances. I'm looking to get one that does have that third resistance, and specifically, I desperately need some chaos resistance. So if you can get fire, cold, and chaos would be great. Otherwise, any triple resistance will work out just as well. And then taking a look at our first ring, we are using prismatic rings. This is going to help us with our overall elemental resistances. We want to try to get our resistances maxed out if possible. And so for an implicit, this one's giving us plus 10. The other things to look for on here is going to be, once again, the increased maximum mana. The 26% increased rarity of items found is really great and is super helpful, and especially helps us find better items as we continue farming our maps. However, this one is not mandatory. What we do want though is we do want some increased cast speed if possible on here. We definitely need the additional resistance. And then lastly, we have an additional 27 mana per enemy killed. I think you're starting to notice the pattern here. We do want to have as much mana, and we want to have as much mana recovery as possible, so that way we can continue to trigger our comets and wiping out all of our enemies without us getting into any real danger. Taking a look at our helm, this one hasn't changed, so we are still using a series Disdain. The important thing to take a look at here is that yes, we are getting some additional mana from here. We're also getting some rarity of items found, which is great, but we're getting 25% of our maximum life as extra maximum energy shield, which is extremely helpful. Now, if you have the opportunity to get one of these, or if you already have one, try to get one that's got the minimum damage taken that bypasses the energy shield, and so 20% is going to be best for that. If you have 25%, what I'm finding is, especially if you're using this with Ghost Sprite, it does bypass your energy shield, and then there may be cases later on in the game where you are getting one-shotted. So try to get the minimum possible for the damage taken bypassing your energy shield. Taking a look at our body armor, this is one we did swap out. So previously we were using Ghostwraith, but again, as we got into the later part of the content, we were having some difficulties with getting one-shotted because it was dropping our life pretty low and bringing it close to 500 or 600. We want to try to avoid that because that would allow us to get one-shotted, and it kind of defeats the whole purpose of using this. So what we switched over to here, and what's important to look at, is we're getting maximum energy shield. Once again, the more we can get of that, the better. We're also getting increased energy shield, which really helps us out and helps our tank ability. We're getting some maximum life, which is crucial to have on this piece of armor. We're also getting plus 43 to spirit, and this is what allows us to have additional cast on minion death and allows us to have other buff skills as well. So definitely try to get something that's got at least 40 to spirit. If you can get higher than that, once again, that would be great. And then lastly, we're looking for something that's got triple resistances. So for mine, I've got cold resistance, lightning resistance, and I can barely call the chaos resistance helpful because it's only got +4. But if you can get one that's got that in the 20s or 30s, that would be really helpful, and that will probably bring you pretty close to maxing out all of your resistances. Taking a look at our belt, this one I've gone back and forth on. I am still using the Midnight Braid because it does help with mana, and it does have +10 to all elemental resistances, which is really great. However, if you can, and what I have been swapping it out for every here and there, is a rare belt that's got additional life triple resistances as well, and with those resistances being in the 20s or 30s as well. The nice thing about that is, once again, that brings us close to maxing out all of our elemental resistances, if not all of them. And then of course, if you can get one that gives you an additional charm slot, that would be really helpful. The downside to getting any other belts is, in most cases, you're going to lose that 24% implicit maximum energy shield that we got from veiling this belt. Taking a look at our amulet, so this is one piece that is crucial to have for this build. If you don't have this, build will not work. The important things that we're looking at here is the fire damage that we take when we ignite an enemy. And so typically that would harm us, but when we pair this up with the necromantic talisman, all of that damage goes to our raging spirits, which causes them to die a little bit faster, and in turn causing the comet to strike a little bit more frequently. So it's important that we have this. This also is probably the most expensive piece of equipment that we are using as well. I had to buy this one for 1 divine orb. Everything else you should be able to get from 1 to 5 exalted orbs, but for this one, this is going to be a little bit more expensive, so keep that in mind. But like I said, without this, the build is not going to work. Taking a look at our second ring, to your surprise, I'm sure, we've got another prismatic ring, and once again, we're getting some elemental resistances. We don't care about the physical damage. We absolutely will take the maximum life though. The increased rarity of items found is also very helpful. The attributes is great. We'll take the intelligence, which we really don't need as much, but the other thing that's really helpful on here is going to be the 14% to all elemental resistances. Taking a look at our boots, so I would say for the boots, 20% increased movement speed should be the minimum you want to have on this build. We want to try to go for 30%. The more agile you are, the easier it's going to be to dodge attacks if you are getting hit or if you're getting shot at. And so 30% increased movement speed is my recommendation for this, but 20% works as well. The other things to look at here is we've got increased energy shield, which is very important. We've got plus 152 to max mana. We want to try to have a minimum of 150. And then if you can get something that's got triple resistances, that would be really helpful as well. So I currently only have 2, but if I can get some chaos resistance on here as well, that would really help me out. And then for our last item that we have on here, we are using a scepter with this. And the importance of the scepter is that we're getting increased spirit. You need to have a minimum of 60% increased spirit in order to be able to make this build work. And so in addition to having the 60% increased spirit, you are going to need to use an Arcanist Etcher for this so you can improve the quality. By improving the quality, it's also going to increase your overall spirit as well. If you can get one that is higher than the 60% or 64%, that may allow you to also put blink onto the build, which would be really helpful, especially if you get stuck in a tight spot. As of right now, I don't have quite enough to get there. However, we do definitely need to have this on our build to make this work as well. And then the other things we want to look for on your scepter is Malice. Malice is going to inflict critical weakness on your enemies, and so that's going to increase our damage output as well, so it's important to have that. And then of course the additional mana and the increased mana regeneration is also extremely helpful. What you want to avoid having on your scepter is anything that's going to boost your minions' defenses and also boost their life. Again, we want our minions to die as frequently as possible so that we can trigger Comet as frequently as possible, and so it's really important that we avoid any type of a boost to your minions. So with all of that equipment on, the way that our stats are going to look, and we definitely have some opportunity in some of our resistances like I mentioned, but as far as our stats are concerned, this is what we're looking at here. So we've got 75 fire resistance, 75 cold resistance. Our lightning resistance is pretty close to max at 62. The one that we struggle with the most right now is our chaos resistance, and it is important that we build this up. And as I showed you guys, we have opportunity on both our gloves and also our boots to increase the resistance for chaos and bring this closer up to that 75%. So really important to have this here. For our maximum life, we're currently at 1347. By putting on our Ghost Wraith, this drops us down, like I mentioned, to about 500 or 600, which is really going to hurt us because we can get one shot. And so it's better to balance it out and take that off and use a regular armor like we're doing now, and also having a more balanced energy shield too. While we do definitely want to have energy shield in the 3000s if possible, this works as far as balance is concerned. And so I'll show you guys how you can also improve your energy shield momentarily via your skills. And speaking of our skills, let's go ahead and take a look at that. So when we look at our skills, some of the important things to look at here, we are using Malice from our Scepter for that critical weakness, and we're going to pair this up with Persistence. This allows us to have 40% more skill effect duration, which makes that super helpful. And then secondly, we are going to be using Sigil of Power, and we're getting this from our staff. We're going to set this to our secondary, so whenever we cast our Sigil of Power, it'll automatically switch over to our staff, and then once we use any of our other skills, it'll switch it back over to our primary wand and scepter. And then for our next skill, we have Grim Feast. Grim Feast is going to be extremely helpful, and this is how we're going to get additional energy shield. So each time you kill an enemy, they have a 50% chance to spawn a remnant, and then once you pick up that remnant, it'll give you, in my case specifically, 167 towards energy shield. Now the nice thing about this is it has the ability to overflow, and so what that means is even though my energy shield is currently showing at 1604, if I pick up as many of those remnants as possible, it allows us to double, meaning I can take this all the way up to 3208. So if I know that I'm going to be going to battle a boss, or if I know I'm going to battle against an elite, try to stack that up as much as possible. So then your life should be at least 1300, and then your energy shield should be over 3000 by utilizing this Grim Feast. We are going to pair up our Grim Feast with Clarity. And then at this moment in time, I don't quite have enough spirit to add Blink on, but I did have a little bit to spare, and so I did throw on Arctic Armor. This is absolutely not necessary. You don't need to use this. In fact, I feel like I'm probably just using this more so because it looks cool, but this is not necessary. If you have the extra spirit, it could be helpful. If that's the case, I am pairing this up with Glaciation just so that we can have some additional freeze buildup. This does help if you're getting struck by enemies that are nearby, so it can be helpful. However, like I said, this is not a part of the build, so you really don't need this, but if you have the extra spirit, might as well just throw that on there too. For our next skill, we are using Fireball. Now, again, it is extremely important that we're getting as low of a level Fireball as possible, and so in this case, level 9 is going to be the lowest that you can get. That will make it a little bit better, and the purpose of that is we want to make sure that our Fireball does not destroy our Frost Walls as we're casting those as well, and Fireball is not what's dealing our damage anyways. Our damage is coming from Comet instead. And so we're going to pair up our Fireball with Scattershot. We're also going to be using Unleash. Next up, we've got Ricochet, and then Arcane Tempo. And finally, we are using Wild Shards, and Wild Shards gives us a 20% chance to fire 8 additional projectiles in a circle. So more fireballs means potentially more Raging Spirits. More Raging Spirits means more Comets, and so this is really helpful. But like I mentioned earlier, there will be times when you are potentially running into maps that are going to make it a little bit laggy because we're firing off so many shots at once. And if you're finding that to be a problem, or if a specific map is causing that problem, then I would swap that out for mobility, allowing you to lose less movement speed as you continue to attack, making you a little bit more agile and allowing you to clear maps a little bit quicker. And then we are also using Eye of Winter, which we are pairing up with Strip Away. This one has not changed. We're also going to be using Cold Exposure. And lastly, we're using Inevitable Critical. For our Raging Spirits, we are using a level 4 Raging Spirits. So this is the minimum level that you can get, and also the maximum level that we want. We want our Raging Spirits to die as frequently as possible. Again, that's what's going to trigger those Comets, which means you'll be able to clear through your maps a little bit quicker by doing that. If you have anything higher than that, it's not going to trigger your Comets, so you may find yourself struggling to take down your enemies. So it is extremely important that when you are putting on your Raging Spirits, you get a level 4. I know how difficult it is to get a Spirit Gem level 4, but if you can't find one, and I haven't been able to find one while farming, you can always go onto the trade website and you can purchase one from somebody on there. We're going to pair up our Raging Spirits with Infernal Legion. We're also going to be using Feeding Frenzy. Then we're going to put on Minion Instability. And lastly, we're also going to use Fire Exposure for our Raging Spirits. For our first cast on Minion Death, and I also did get some questions about how I'm able to use more than one at a time. So for those of you that are curious, what you want to do is first you want to purchase your cast on Minion Death twice before you equip it or before you put it on your skill bar. Once you've purchased both of them, then you can go ahead and put both of them on, and then you can add your Comet or whatever other skills you're wanting to add. And so purchase those first. in order to be able to have the spirit to use this, we are using the scepter to help us out with that. So go back and take a look at the equipment if you need to, but it is really important that you're purchasing them first. Otherwise, if you buy one and you put it on, you won't be able to get the second one because it's going to assume that you're already using it. Now, with that, for our first cast on minion death, we are pairing it up with Comet, and then we are also using Spell Cascade, Inspiration, Spell Echo, and finally, we're also using Magnified Effect. And then for our next skill, we have Conductivity. Conductivity is helpful because we are using Archmage, and so we do want to reduce the enemy's elemental resistance to lightning as much as possible. We're pairing Conductivity up with Focused Curse. We're also going to use Heightened Curse, and then finally Hex Bloom. For our second cast on minion death, we are using Frostwall. Now, I've also had a lot of questions about this. The purpose of using Frostwall is, yes, it does do some damage, and it does help with freezing some enemies every here and there, but the main purpose for this is it helps us with our survivability. And so especially when you're going up against big groups, or if you're going up against breaches, by having Frostwall automatically cast, it allows you a chance to get away while you're also able to cast your fireballs and also triggering your comets as well. So this is something that's really mostly for survivability. You also can swap this out for a second Comet if you'd like to. That's going to help you with additional DPS, but you may find yourself in a little bit more trouble, especially as you get into the further levels of mapping with enemies killing you or maybe approaching you a little bit too quickly. So it's up to you what you want to do for this, but my recommendation is to go with Frostwall. If you do use Frostwall, I would pair that up with Impetus and then using Lightning Exposure. We're going to use Glacier with this so that we can improve the Ice Crystal life. And then lastly, we're using Rising Tempest with this as well to help us with some additional DPS. And then lastly, for our skills, we are using Archmage. And so the purpose of Archmage is it gives you extra damage as lightning damage for every 100 maximum mana that you have. And so in this case, we are using non-channeling skills. Fireball is a non-channeling skill. And so we're getting an additional 6% extra damage as lightning damage for each 100 maximum mana that we currently have. And so what's important to look at here, and the reason that we're using Conductivity is specifically because of this. And so once we add up all of our maximum mana, that additional 6% is going to significantly increase the damage output for this specific build. So really important to have this. And we are pairing this up with Lightning Mastery so we can get +1 to all lightning skills as well. So that's what our skill tree looks like. Lastly, we'll go ahead and also take a look at our passive skill tree. For our passive skill tree, starting with our ascendancies, we are going to go down to the left-hand side here first for your ascendancies. If you haven't gotten all of your ascendancy points, start with Constant Gale and then go down to Force of Will. Before then, you make your way over to the left, grabbing Elemental Resistances along with Heart of the Storm. And then on the right-hand side, we're going to grab Elemental Damage as well as Scouring Winds. Now then, with that, we'll go ahead and make our way up to the first couple of nodes we'll grab here, which will be just our energy shield on the left-hand side, going up to pure energy. We'll then continue our way up and grab Mana Blessing along with dampening shield. And then we'll also make sure we grab these couple of nodes here so that we can get some additional crit spell damage bonus before we make our way over to the left-hand side here, going up before we grab our heavy buffer along with these additional energy shield nodes. And then we'll continue making our way up on the left-hand side, stopping at repulsion. And then we'll make our way up on the left-hand side here, grabbing these additional crit damage nodes, and then also stopping at desensitization. And then we'll continue making our way up to calibration. We'll also grab all natural on the top here before then we pivot over to the right. Now, it is extremely important that we make our way up and grab this Necromantic Talisman node. This is what allows the damage from the amulet to apply to your minions instead of us. And so the benefit of this is that it's going to kill our minions a lot faster, and again, triggering your Comet to strike more frequently as well. And then we'll continue to make our way over to the right, where we'll stop and grab the Overexposure node in the middle. We'll then make our way down a little bit and grab the Sudden Escalation node. We'll proceed on up and make our way over to the right. if you're struggling with your energy shield or your energy shield recharge rate, you can grab these nodes here. For now, I've only grabbed 2 to help me out with the 30% increased energy shield recharge rate. Might be more important to grab something that starts your energy shield regeneration a little bit faster, but this I'm finding to be super helpful as well. And then from here, we'll make our way on up and over to the right, where we're going to stop and get controlling magic and the surrounding nodes around it as well. This will give us some additional critical hit chance, which is super helpful because, like I mentioned earlier, we are relying on critical hits to deal as much damage as possible with this build. We're then also going to grab the patient barrier on the right hand side for some increased maximum energy shield. And then eventually we'll come back and we'll grab ingenuity as well if you have enough points. For now, I've skipped it because I have better use for the points, but eventually we may circle back to this as well. We then will make our way down where we're going to grab raw mana along with arcane intensity as well as ether flow. And then, of course, we are also grabbing Eldritch Battery. And just so that you guys know, the conversion that's happening from our energy shield to our mana does not apply to the nodes that you're grabbing off of your passive skill tree. So if I add additional points into my energy shield on my passive skill tree, that's not going to convert over to additional mana. So keep that in mind. But anything that you're getting from your equipment definitely will do that. And then making our way over to the right, we will stop and grab Energize along with Invocated Efficiency and the nodes surrounding that as well. We are going to be skipping the Chaos Inoculation. While it is really helpful to have that immunity to chaos damage, we cannot afford to have only 1 point for our maximum life. Since we're using a series Disdain, that 20 to 25% that bypasses your energy shield would instantly kill you. So we are going to skip that for now, unless we can find a better way to replace a series Disdain. We'll then make our way over to the right where we'll grab some additional nodes for our critical hits, specifically Careful Assassin and the surrounding nodes here. And then if you guys are a higher level than I am, and at this point of recording this video, I am at level 86, you will continue to make your way on down to this empty jewel socket here, and eventually get over to the left where we're gonna grab some additional critical hit chance from True Strike, for the Jugular, and Deadly Force as well, but that'll be closer to your maximum level. So for now, we're not going to worry about that. If you're finding that your critical hit chance is already good enough and you don't need these nodes, you can go ahead and skip that. You can invest into a little bit more energy shield recharging or energy shield just altogether. And so when we look at our jewels, we want to try to get jewels that are similar to this one here, where we're getting some additional energy shield recharge rate, we're getting some mana regeneration, we're getting chance to ignite, and then we're also increasing the area of effect for our curses, which is really helpful. But then we also want to try to grab something that's got additional cold damage. If you don't have those things, we definitely want to try to grab some critical hit chance with this as well. And then also grabbing something that's got damage penetrating specifically for cold resistance as well would be super helpful. So any combination of those jewels are going to be super helpful for you. That's all I have for you guys for today. Thank you guys so much for joining me and watching this video. If you guys like this video, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment below so I can continue making videos like this. I more than likely will be posting one additional update to this once I'm further into the 90s, if there's any additional updates that are needed, or if I find something that's going to take this a step further. With that said, thank you guys again so much for joining me, and until next time, Exiles.